This is the Metro. I'm Sam Corey. Safety continues to improve in Detroit. Recent numbers suggest that homicides fell well below 200 last year. That was the first time that happened in 6 decades. There are a number of things that are given credit for the decline. Community violence interventionists are preventing harm. Police officers are focusing on de-escalation and completing their homicide investigations. And the decline is also attributed to increased surveillance with things like Project Greenlight. Now, Mayor Mary Sheffield is creating an Office of Neighborhood and Community Safety, which will focus on mental health issues, after-school programs, and jobs to further increase resident safety. What exactly will this office be doing? And why is a holistic approach needed to increase resident safety? To discuss all that, we have Shante Jackson here. She is the director of the National Offices of Violence Prevention Network at the National Institute for Criminal Justice Reform. Shante and her organization will help establish the office in Detroit. Shante Jackson, welcome to the Metro.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, I appreciate you being here. So you've helped establish these kinds of offices elsewhere. What does an Office of Neighborhood and Community Safety do?
Thanks for the question. I'll start by saying that generally speaking, offices of this type are known as offices of violence prevention. And that's because they focus on addressing the root causes of violence and supporting community violence intervention and prevention strategies through the lens of public health across the country. We see that happening at the local level, at the county level, and even at the state level here in the United States, with well over 100 of those types of offices currently in place.
I want to talk a little bit about the root causes of violence and the public health sort of approach. But just in terms of Detroit's office, do you have an understanding of how many people will be involved in this thing, the experiences that those folks will have, and honestly, how long it will take for this office to get up and running?
So I'll start by saying that I think it's really important that we talk about what the office has been named first, right? Very different from some other offices in that it's being called a Neighborhood and Community Safety Office, which really tells us out of the gate that this is not just going to be some sort of generic administrative unit. Neighborhood in the name tells us that the mayor plans to be really intentional about addressing violence where it happens, but also making sure that the solutions come ground up from those neighborhoods instead of being imposed top down. Community in the name really tells us that this office is going to have a focus that is much broader than crime statistics and is really going to be focusing on well-being, on trust, on connection, and on relationships, because all of those things are necessary if Detroit wants to continue to see the record level reductions that you all are seeing right now.
And you're saying that this is a little bit different than neighborhood safety offices or safety offices around the country?
What I'm saying is that offices of violence prevention come in various different forms and name types, but they all have the same core mission of addressing the root causes of violence in our communities. Calling an office one that is an Office of Neighborhood and Community Safety very intentionally points to a deep understanding that there's got to be a multi-pronged approach to this. Right, that it can't just be a top-down approach to getting to a safer community or a safer neighborhood.
You were talking a little bit about the root causes of violence and resolving those things. What are some of those root causes? I know there are many.
Yeah, and I'm sure that this won't come as a surprise to Detroiters. If we think about the social determinants of health, we're really thinking about access to resources, right? And there being scarcity, whether we're talking about food deserts or an increased number of vacancies or vacant properties within a neighborhood, whether we're talking about access to quality education, talking about adequate transportation. How long does it take the average person to get to work in Detroit, and by what mechanisms do they have the ability to get there? Want to be really clear that it's not the Office of Violence Prevention's charge to undo all of those related social determinants of health, because that's extremely transformative, right? And community transformation work takes many, many decades to address.
Mm.
Instead, what the office that you all are setting up is going to be focusing on is true community-centered, evidence-informed strategies to reduce violence rather than relying solely on law enforcement to do that.
Why are those things important for safety? I think if you talk to some people and you said, hey, food security is really important, making sure people have after-school programs to go to, making sure they have jobs, they wouldn't necessarily think that that's the first thing to focus on when they think of safety. They'll just be like, well, there's violence happening. You got to go stop it. Why are those things important?
So I would offer that the multi-pronged approach that offices of violence prevention take is one that does initially and primarily focus on community violence intervention, right? You all have programs like Shot Stoppers. You all have programs like Force Detroit that are doing critical community work as it relates to community violence intervention. That very much is how the public approach or public health approach to violence works, where you are making sure that you are focusing attention on those folks that need it most urgently, i.e. those folks that are at the highest likelihood of being shot and or being a shooter. And you also want to be doing prevention level work with the understanding that intervention level work sees returns on investment in relatively short time frames, anywhere between 1 and 3 years, and prevention work takes longer, right? About 3 to 5 years to really see outcomes. But both things are critically important in order to get to a place of sustained reductions.
Yeah, and so for the long term, you need to do some of that community building, making sure people have the resources they have, making sure they're connected to pro-social institutions, that kind of thing, and that will prevent violence in the long term.
That's correct, because community violence prevention is infrastructure, right? It is not a program of the month. Community violence prevention, though, takes a bit longer while necessary, and community violence intervention is meeting people where they are right now.
You noted some of those organizations, some of the people on the ground doing the work right now in Detroit. There's also community violence interventionists. What will be the role of those folks in terms of the Office of Neighborhood and Community Safety in Detroit?
So I'm really excited to be partnering with the mayor and the team that's going to be built. Already have existing relationships there. With Mike Peterson, given that before this administration, it was a program, right, and is in large part attributable to the success that you all have seen as it relates to community violence intervention work and the reductions in your city. I expect CVI workers, frontline workers, in our relationship with you all to continue to be at the forefront of the work, because by definition, community violence intervention workers are those who come from the communities that they serve. They're the ones that have the high level of credibility in order to actually engage with folks at the highest risk of violence and to deter that risk from happening, or deter that violence from happening.
Do you, just for logistical sakes, do you know how long this office will take to get up and running, and how many people will be in it?
So those are conversations that are in the works right now, and I think that much of that will depend on what ultimately the broader strategic charge is that the mayor gives to the appointee who's going to be leading the office.
This is The Metro. I'm Sam Corey. My guest is Shantay Jackson. She is a violence reduction expert for the National Institute for Criminal Justice Reform. We're discussing the creation of Detroit's Office of Neighborhood and Community Safety, which Shantay's organization is helping to establish. I want to ask you a little bit, Shantay, about Baltimore, because you helped set up the Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement there in 2020, and there are a lot of these office of safety offices in mayoral departments or mayoral and city departments across the country. What does that office look like in Baltimore? What are the things that are going on there to reduce violence and crime?
Yeah, so I would offer that Mayor Scott made it very clear when he came in, similar to Detroit that there needed to be a shift in thinking, a shift in approach, and a deepening in some cases to pre-existing approaches, which is why the office in Baltimore was established, and as its first executive director, really being thoughtful about how do we make sure that we reduce violence in the short term. That's intervention work. And so the work that we see core happening to what they affectionately call is MONSE, the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement, here in Baltimore.
Yeah.
Yep, so do I. Here in Baltimore City, you see them doing violence interruption, mediation, victim services, reentry services, providing wraparound supports. You see them doing a whole host of things. What I want to be really clear about, though, is they're partnering with community-based organizations to do the work, right? And so that community ultimately owns and is co-producing public safety with the administration. It's quite frankly, an all-hands-on-deck approach that leverages city agencies, state agencies, and community-based partners to, impact the record-level reductions that are being seen here as well.
Yeah.
I will say, though, that that's what I have been seeing happen on a programmatic level in Detroit. I've been familiar with your work since 2021. I think Mike and I have known each other that long.
Mike Duggan, the former mayor
Mike Peterson.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, sorry, Mike Peterson, who runs the CVI work out of the mayor's office right now, and who's going to be a critical part of standing up the new mayor's office. And so very similarly, making sure that we don't lose sight of the things that are working while introducing new components that make a CVI ecosystem even stronger.
You've been doing this work for some time. I mean, is this the trend that you're seeing of community leaders, community residents having more power and agency and autonomy to sort of lead the charge to reduce violence and also just like be empowered to be leaders in their communities? Is that something you're seeing?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I would offer that overwhelmingly the OVP directors or the ONS or the ONSE directors that I see across the country are folks who are born and raised residents of the city that they're working to support, who have demonstrated years of either advocacy or direct service support, either through working with local community-based organizations and or within the educational system, but absolutely folks who have a deep love and dedication for their city, stepping into, and many for the first time, the public administration space, right? In order to make sure that there is adequate community representation associated with the co-production of the work.
Yeah, and I just want to clarify, you mentioned ONS, that's Office of Neighborhood Safety. Detroit's Office of Neighborhood and Community Safety could have a lot of potential goals that steer it. What do you think they might be?
I would offer that when NICJR has conversations with folks about what they want their overarching goal to be as they start to think through a multi-year comprehensive violence reduction strategy, one of those things that they should be thinking about is what does a year-over-year reduction in gun violence look like? And how does that align with best practices to get you to a place of sustained reductions? Other things that folks are thinking about as it relates to goals that they're setting translate into work associated with returning citizens and reductions of recidivism rates. Those are two things that come top of mind for me.
Yeah. In terms of creating those goals, in terms of reducing recidivism and reducing gun violence, do you put a number behind that? Do you say this number was X last year, we want it to be Y this year?
So when we think about gun violence numbers, national best practice indicates that a reasonable and attainable goal year over year is 10% in both non-fatals and homicides. This is information that we've shared out with members of our network, and Detroit's been a member of the NOVTN since 2021 when it formed, even though there was no official office. And so there should be a high level of familiarity with that particular percentage. At the end of the day, though, the administration needs to choose what's going to make the most sense for it. For example, here in Baltimore, my charge under my mayor was 15% year-over-year reduction. Even though best practice was
that's high.
10%, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, my mayor happens to be highly competitive.
There you go. There you go.
But here we are, just like Detroit, looking at lows that haven't existed since well before I was born. And I'm a grandmother, so I've been around for a little while, you know?
You're actually, I want to talk about sort of crime declines more broadly, because I know you're steeped in this stuff. We began the show noting a remarkable drop in homicides in Detroit since the 1970s. During the 1970s, there was a huge crime wave in the U.S. We seem to be continuing in the opposite direction, which is good news, especially since the 2000s, reducing crime. What, in your opinion, have we been getting right in terms of reducing crime, reducing violence in the U.S. in the last few decades?
Yeah. It's interesting. I've been extremely excited, pleased, and grateful for what we're seeing across the country. Seeing Detroit have 165 homicides, I think it was, last year in 2025. That's the lowest since the 1960s, right? Not the 70s.
Yeah, thank you for that, yes.
But coming back to your question around contributing factors, I think that one of the biggest factors was the announcement back in 2021 by the general surgeon that gun violence was a public health issue. And an acknowledgement that it was a public health issue, right? Because it means that it would be treated in a different way, not just by law enforcement, but also by community-based organizations. While that's not the singular factor, we're seeing in some communities increased partnership with law enforcement. We're seeing gains around trust in some communities. We're seeing higher clearance rates from a police department perspective. We really want to step through the reality that there was a surge, a major influx of funding into community-based organizations. So the people who live in your neighborhoods, who know your neighborhoods best, had actually been given the resources that they needed to serve the folks who were at the highest risk in their neighborhoods.
That public health approach has me wondering the perspective of the police. You are a collaborator. You organize with a lot of different folks, and you sort of, it seems like, get them in the same room together. That includes the police. Have they been happy with that pivot to looking at safety as through a public health lens?
I would offer that it depends on the jurisdiction in which you're in. As would be the case anywhere.
Yeah,
right?
I appreciate that. What makes them more likely? What makes them more likely to appreciate it, if they do?
Yeah, so I can't answer what would make a police chief and or a police department more likely to embrace it. But what I will say is that if there is an acknowledgement that when we treat violence the same way we treat things like asthma or car crashes or heart disease, where we look at the patterns and the risk factors and prevention, then it means that we're not just focusing on punishment. There are many police chiefs across the country. I had the fortunate ability to work with many of those that absolutely recognize this, right?
Shante Jackson is a violence reduction expert with the National Institute for Criminal Justice Reform. Shante, thanks so much for joining us on the Metro.
Thank you.
Coming up, the I-375 redevelopment project was paused in August, but now it's back on. We'll hear about what the new plans will look like.